Research from other countries has shown is that people's experience of homelessness is a lot more complicated than just being without a house. We wanted to arrive at a genuine place-based understanding of factors that would raise the risk of an adult experiencing homelessness in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton. Was there a pathway of common disruptive events over time, as had been shown in research from other countries? And if so, when had that journey begun for people? And knowing all of this, where and how could we have intervened with the right resources at the right time to help people avoid experiencing homelessness? People who experience homelessness are the experts about homelessness. We knew it was important to collect evidence about what had happened and advice about any interventions people had experienced, what had worked and what hadn't, from those who had experienced homelessness in Hamilton. Throughout 2019, 100 people who were working with the People's Project in Hamilton volunteered to tell me their story. Interviews lasted about 1 hour. I used questions from research about homelessness in other countries, as well as some questions developed with the help of the team at the People's Project. I went back and talked to 11 people in a lot more depth in a second interview to make sure I hadn't overlooked anything important that was happening in Hamilton. Once I'd put the interview information together, I went back to 6 people to ask if they felt I'd collected the right information, if anything important was missing, and if the words and language I was using was right, and if they could see their own experiences of homelessness fairly represented in the results. I made some important changes based on that feedback. Together, I feel that we've arrived at a consensus about the factors that have contributed to people's journey to the People's Project's door. While everyone's journey into homelessness is unique, we discovered that there was a similar pattern in Hamilton to the journey of single adults experiencing homelessness in other countries, such as America, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. Results revealed a pathway of common disruptive events had occurred across people's lifespan. For most people, this had started with a high rate of adverse childhood events, abuse, disruptive home lives, which most people had experienced between the ages of 6 and 9 years old. Half had had an out-of-home placement in foster care or in other child protection services. By an average age of 28 years old, most people had experienced disruptive schooling, become unwell, developed substance-based coping mechanisms, and most had come to the attention of police or been in prison or been in acute health settings. Health and well-being issues followed people into adulthood. Although most people had worked before, the majority were currently on a benefit. Poverty and debt contributed to most people not having enough money to solve their own housing crisis. Plus, housing was expensive and hard to get into due to many levels of discrimination and inequity. A surprising result for me was the impact of disconnection from family and other familial networks. Most reported facing homelessness feeling alone. In fact, being alone is how some people described what the word homelessness meant to them. Disconnection was almost as big an issue for people than not being able to solve their own homelessness. What people said we should do to stop homelessness is intervene early in the pathway identified, preferably before things go wrong in childhood. People said these early events, without a way to address them, contributed negatively to their life's journey. Through the generosity of 100 people who willingly shared the story of their lives with me, we now have a place-based understanding of what has contributed to people's journey to the People's Project door. For most people, homelessness didn't just happen yesterday. It was a lifetime in the making. People were connected with multiple organisations in our community, and yet they still ended up homeless. People said the right intervention anywhere across that pathway could have made a difference. What we also know is that homelessness is not just about being without a house. Access to housing alone is unlikely to solve homelessness for those who've survived the level of lifelong disruption people described. What this tells us is that specialist support is needed for those experiencing homelessness later in life. We know the Housing First approach used by the People's Project includes this important element, that of specialist support. This research adds to our understanding of contributors to homelessness in Hamilton. The voices of those who've experienced homelessness in this community have provided us with a roadmap for homelessness response, where to intervene, what works and what doesn't.